Hi, my name's Frank Sernamuel. I joined the Royal Australian Navy in January 1961, at the age of 17. And I then afterwards, after some time in the Navy, I served in the citizen military forces in the Army, and I raised a family. But I've been following what's happening in the world, in particular with the US and the deep state for the last 30, 40 years. I was on HMAS Melbourne when the Cuban Missile Crisis started. We thought we'd go to war then.
Wasn't you, Kennedy?
Yes. But fortunately, Russia stood back and let America have their way.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized.
America have their way. Now that's not what's happened over in Ukraine. You can see that the NATO is attacking the citizens in the eastern Ukraine and right on the border of Russia, and they expect Russia to put up with it. Is that fair? But what's more important is this rally. I came here with my eldest son, and it's very important to us. We support Russia. And unfortunately, I serve with Americans in the Navy, and great people. But they've been taken over by the deep state, and it is no longer America. The same as Australia. Our politicians and that have been taken over by the deep state or the World Economic Forum or the Ashkenazi Nazis or whatever you want to call them.
Bolshevik Revolution. Bolshevik Revolution.
And yes, the Bolshevik and the Revolution. So all of these things have been happening under the wing of the United States, which have been taken over by the deep state and the Ashkenazis. Now that means that, you know, I don't hold anything against America and Americans because they're under the same thumb as we are. But what I wanted to see, because I remember back and I thought there was a bit of a replay here. A few weeks ago, we had a memorial for the 20th anniversary of the Bali bombing. The Bali bombing. Now, at that Bali bombing, I recall that the news at the time, there was a Captain Rodney Cox, who was an army captain, who was serving in East Timor, and he was on leave in Bali when the bomb went off at the Sari Club. And he witnessed, he was probably about 200 metres away. He got bowled over, but he said in his report to headquarters that it was a nuclear weapon. He said because the lights went out, which was an EMP from a nuclear weapon, and then there was a massive ball of fire that it bowled him over. Now, it was, in essence, and I've seen the reports, a suitcase bomb. Now, I can't say that to the relatives because they get upset about it. But it was a false flag to get Australia involved in the Iraq War.
Yep.
And that was in October 2001. In February 2002, there was protests against the war in Iraq, which the United States announced they were going to do. They were going to invade Iraq and get rid of Saddam. There was a general in America who found out about this 6 months beforehand, almost after the Twin Towers. And he was told at the time that the US decided after that, they declared war on terrorism, and that they were going to take over 7 nations in the next 5 years. Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Libya, and all those. And there's a video, you can look up YouTube and I think, I'm forgetting the name of the general, but it's very common. Who? Wesley Clark.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision, we're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq, why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use.
Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark. Yep, okay. And we're going to take over the 7 nations in 5 years, and those 7 nations were nations that did not have a Rothschild's bank. They were independent, and they were the only ones in the world that did not have a Rothschild bank.
Iran now?
Right, now, yep. And Iran was one of them. But basically, there was, in February, the whole nation got against us when it was announced they were going to declare war on Iraq. And what really amazed me today was that the protests at that time, in February 2002, there were 500,000 in Sydney, 200,000 in Melbourne, and 150,000 in Brisbane. And that's the sort of protest rally, but it didn't do any good anyway, because we found out later that the SAS had been sent into Iraq to destroy all the missile silos for the missiles that Iraq had, and they were in there before the war started. So I would hope, the trouble is nowadays, I'm on Facebook, I've been trying to get the message out, but I've now been punished by not having any of my posts seen by everyone else. They told me that. And so I can't get the message out. I go on to Telegram, I see Aussies and the MOD Russia and the Chronicles of the Conflict, which tells me all about what's happening with Russia. And you weigh that up and you just can't sort of understand what's happening in terms of the media. They're not picking that up. Ricardo Bossi is a hero, a Lieutenant Colonel, ex-Lieutenant Colonel of the SAS, a distinguished ex-soldier. Now, I was horrified to see an article which basically called him psychiatric crazed man because of what he was doing. And then there's a video on YouTube. Andrew Wilkie, remember that name? Andrew Wilkie was a ex-lieutenant colonel of the Australian Army who was in the Office of National Assessments, which did all the intelligence assessments. And Andrew decided, when they said that the Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and he knew that was not true, he decided to be a whistleblower. So he resigned and he went out and told the truth. It was published in all the main media, and unfortunately Andrew was sent to Coventry. He was called insane, psychiatric, and that. But he did that because he could not live with himself with that lie. So what we need to do is to find other people that can do that. And what we really need to do, if you're going to have another protest, is really get the message out. I'd like to see, if there was 500,000 protesters for the Iraq War in Sydney in 2002, I reckon we should get 1 million here. Particularly if they know the truth about what is happening.
They lie, the men who tell us, for reasons of their own. Want is here a stranger, miseries unknown, where the nearest suburb and the city proper meet. High windowsill is level with the faces in the street. Drifting past to the beat of weary feet. I sorrow for the owners of the faces in the street, and cause I have to sorrow in a land so young and fair. See upon those faces the marks of want and care, and I look in vain for traces of the fresh and fair and sweet, in the sallow sunken faces that are drifting through the street. Drifting on to the scrape of restless feet. I sorrow for the owners of the faces in the street. And I wonder, would the apathy of wealthy men endure, for all their windows level with the faces of the poor? Our mammon's slaves, your knees shall knock, your hearts in terror beat, when your God demands a reason for the sorrows of the street. The wrong things and the bad things, and the sad things that we meet in the filthy lane and alley, and the cruel and heartless street. Almighty, if thy might does still endure, now show me in a vision for the wrongs of earth the cure. And lo, with shops all shuttered, I saw a city street, and in the warning distance heard the tramp of many feet. Pouring on to a drum's loud threatening beat, and the war hymns and the cheering of the people in the street. So it must be while the world goes rolling round its course, the warning pen shall write in vain, the warning voice grow hoarse, and kindle eyes all blazing bright, revolution's heat, and flashing swords reflecting rigid faces in the street. Coming near, to a drum's dull distant beat, then I saw the army